was not a barrier to the rise. And so you see the highest divorce rate in the U.S. around 1980, and a pretty dramatic tapering off and a continuing decline, but it's slowed, that decline has, in the very earliest part of the 21st century. At the same time, the marriage rate is on the decline as well in the United States. So the decline of the marriage rate has actually caught a lot of people's attention and has driven some new laws that are trying to emphasize the advantage and the good benefits of marriage.
What do you think has caused both those declines in the marriage rate and the decline in the divorce rate?
I think it's complicated. I'm certain that changing gender roles is a factor, but I think to the extent that I think that as women have become more economically independent, their need to stay in a marriage that is not healthy, not functioning, has declined, and they're more willing to get out of that marriage. And women, by a big percentage, the person who is the petitioning party in divorces, at least on paper. I mean, that doesn't.
Actually, I did a study on that. We found that I was amazed that 2/3 of the women were actually the petitioner.
The marriage rate decline, I think, is something that's interesting. People are marrying at an older age than they used to be. The median age has risen in the United States. But all of these statistics one has to look at them in terms of socioeconomic class as well, because there are some pretty striking differences. There is a much lower marriage rate as you go down in socioeconomic level, so that people who are at the poverty level or below are much likely to be married, and they're much more likely to divorce than people at the highest end of the economic spectrum. And that, in turn, has driven, for example, the Bush administration to promote marriage among impoverished populations, because the thinking is if wealthier people are married, maybe marriage itself is a causing factor, so if we can get poor people to marry, maybe we'll help the poverty rate. And there's a lot of debate about that logic, but nevertheless, many millions of dollars are being put into the Healthy Marriage Initiative, and programs that are aimed at getting poorer women. It's
Why do you think that on the
women.
socioeconomic level that the people with the lower socioeconomic less married?
Well,
because it's purely cultural, or
it's not a lack of desire to marry. Interesting attitudinal surveys show that most people in the U.S. still think marriage is what partly defines a successful life. They want to get married. Young people of all economic spectrums want to get married. But the prevalence of single mothers in the lower economic levels suggests that there aren't marriageable men, or there aren't men that are so attractive that they're willing to take them on because they may be an economic burden to them. Some people think that our incarceration rate in this country is at odds with our so-called marriage policy, because African American populations are, of course, overrepresented in the poorer income levels, and overrepresented among single mothers, and overrepresented in the prison population among males. So I think there are a lot of factors that are contributing to the very, very, very low marriage rate among those populations. But if you switch gears and look at the highest income level and higher educational levels as well, you see a much higher marriage rate and a much lower divorce rate. So I think it's a difficult act to get your hand on to just talk, you know, generally or monolithically about marriage and divorce in the U.S. because we are such a complicated society and there are vast differences when you look at it more closely as, you know, according to race and economic level.
Do you think that our divorce policy then should reflect that at all, or should we be doing things differently because of the difference in the different populations?
Well, I think we can't make assumptions that by promoting marriage, just promoting it as a kind of uniform policy that's good for everyone will actually cure some of the problems that impact our society. I think it requires a more nuanced approach to some of the disparities in income level and the ongoing poverty rate.
Can you tell us some of the innovative things that some of the courts are doing to make the process of divorce less traumatic?
Well, courts are, I mean, if you look at just what courts are doing, you could look right here in this state and maybe in this county, in Pima County. We have a wonderful conciliation court that is an arm of the Pima County Superior Court.
By the way, Grace Hawkins, who runs it, is going to be a guest on the show also.
Well, that's fabulous because Grace does a really, really wonderful job there. And the conciliation offers a lot of services to families and couples. One is family counseling, couple counseling. Even for an intact marriage, at least you can get one session, I'm told, as a kind of preventive measure to ward off divorce. But once you are in the divorce process, the conciliation court can help you try to repair that marriage, and maybe more importantly for a lot of couples, the conciliation court can help you resolve your custody disputes through a mediation and through a custody evaluator that the conciliation court provides.
And this sort of leads us a good segue into the next question, which is what are the major impacts of divorce on children?
The impact is profound, I think one can say. Studies suggest some fairly significant emotional impacts on children. The more bitter the fighting preceding the divorce and during the divorce, the worse the impact. None of that is surprising.
But you know, a lot of people, I've heard this in my practice, and other people who decided they don't want to get divorced for the sake of the children. Do you think that's necessarily a good thing then?
It depends. Studies show that very, very high conflict marriages are very, very bad for children. It is better in those situations. Most scholars, commentators in this area agree for the parents to separate, because living in an ongoing, highly conflictual family is going to inflict long-term damage on children. On the other hand, studies also suggest that in a marriage that is not perfect but has a low level of conflict, where the parents themselves may prefer to not be together, but they're not openly fighting, it's not filled with hatred, it's not one of those marriages, that in those situations the actual divorce itself does inflict some damage on children.
Well, I was going to ask you that, is that unfortunately in those high conflict situations that you describe with the children tend to be high conflict divorces as well. I'm not sure that you get necessarily a high conflict divorce going to a high conflict marriage going to a low conflict divorce. So, I mean, I'm not so sure which is worse, a high conflict marriage or a high conflict divorce.
Well, both are very bad. We know that, but there are studies that have focused on marriages that have not terminated in divorce, where they are just ongoing, but they are filled with conflict, and those independently create really bad effects for children. So the sort of received common wisdom of staying together for the children certainly isn't true in all cases, although some people are very